The abandoned post office that still receives letters. An original mystery story. At the end of a quiet road in the small town of Willow Creek stood an old post office no one had used for 42 years. The windows were cracked. The red bricks were dark with rain. The flagpole leaned slightly to one side, and above the locked wooden door, faded letters still read, Willow Creek Post Office, 1941. No clerk worked there. No mail truck stopped there. No customer had entered since the town built a modern post office across the river. But every morning, fresh letters appeared inside. No one could explain it. Emma Hayes first heard the story from her grandmother. She was 29, a quiet historian who studied forgotten buildings across America. To her, abandoned places were not empty. They were full of things people had left behind. Old receipts, names carved into desks, photographs hidden in drawers. But Willow Creek's post office was different. Her grandmother had warned her about it many times. Some letters are not meant to be delivered, she used to say. Emma never understood what that meant, until the morning she inherited her grandmother's house and found a letter waiting on the kitchen table. The envelope was yellow with age. Across the front, in careful handwriting, was her name, Emma Hayes. Inside was only one sentence. Go to the old post office before sunrise. The next morning, Emma stood outside the abandoned building as pale light spread across the sky. The street was empty. The town was silent. A thin fog drifted along the ground. Then she heard it. A soft, sliding sound, like paper passing through a mail slot. Emma stepped closer. A fresh white envelope lay just inside the locked door. There were no footprints, no sound from inside, no way anyone could have entered. She reached through the broken glass, pulled the envelope out, and looked at the name. For Mr. Arthur Bell. Arthur Bell was the oldest man in Willow Creek. He lived alone near the old mill. Emma did not know why, but she felt certain the letter had to be delivered before sunset. Arthur opened the door slowly. When he saw the envelope, his face turned pale. Where did you get that? The old post office. His hands trembled as he opened it. The letter was from his daughter, Lily. She had disappeared 30 years earlier after leaving town one winter evening. The police had searched for weeks. No one ever found her. Arthur read silently. Tears filled his eyes. The letter did not explain where she had gone. It only said what she had never said before. That she loved him. That she was sorry. That she hoped one day he would stop waiting at the window. Arthur folded the letter carefully and whispered, "She always wrote her L's like that." Emma felt the air leave her chest. The letter was real, or at least real enough to break a man's heart open. After that day, the post office began leaving letters for Emma every morning. Some were addressed to living people, some to people long dead, some to people who had left Willow Creek years ago and never returned. Emma delivered them all. A letter from a mother to the son she had never forgiven. A letter from a soldier to the girl he promised to marry. A letter from two sisters who had not spoken for 50 years. Each message was short, gentle, necessary. And each time Emma delivered one, something in the town changed. People spoke to each other again. Old arguments faded. Lonely windows opened. Flowers appeared on forgotten graves. It was as if Willow Creek had been holding its breath for decades, and the letters were teaching it how to breathe again. But there was one rule. Every letter had to be delivered before sunset. Emma learned this on the 7th day. A storm flooded the bridge, and she failed to deliver a letter to a woman named Rose Callahan. That night, every mailbox on Rose's street opened by itself. The old post office bell rang 12 times, even though the bell had been removed years earlier. And at midnight, Emma heard whispering outside her window. Hundreds of voices. Soft, patient, waiting. The next morning, the missed letter was gone. Rose Callahan died 2 days later. Emma never forgave herself. After that, she delivered every letter on time, no matter what. Weeks later, Emma searched the town archives. She wanted to know why the post office had closed. The official records said the building was unsafe, but an old newspaper told a different story. In 1982, the postmaster, Henry Vale, had vanished during a winter storm. He was known as a kind man, a man who believed every message mattered. On the night he disappeared, he had stayed late sorting a bag of undelivered letters from decades earlier. Letters lost in floods, returned from war, misplaced during moves, messages that never reached the people who needed them. The next morning, Henry was gone. The doors were locked from the inside. The mailbag was empty, and on his desk was a note. No letter should be buried with the truth. 3 months later, the town closed the building, but the letters continued. One evening, Emma found a hidden room behind the sorting shelves. Inside were thousands of old envelopes stacked from floor to ceiling. None had stamps. None had addresses. Only names. And at the center of the room sat an old leather mailbag. The bag moved slightly, as if something inside was breathing. Emma stepped back. A voice behind her said, "You should not have opened this room." She turned. An old man stood near the doorway, wearing a faded postal uniform. His name badge read, H. Vale. Emma whispered, "Henry?" The man smiled sadly. "I was once." Henry explained that the post office had become a place for words that never reached their destination. Every apology left unsaid, every goodbye swallowed, every truth hidden too long. They gathered there, year after year. The letters were not written by ghosts. They were written by regret. And regret, Henry said, was very patient. "Why me?" Emma asked. Henry looked at her with tired eyes. "Because your grandmother was the last carrier before you." Emma froze. "My grandmother?" "She delivered the letters for 20 years. Why did she stop?" Henry did not answer at first. Then he pointed to the leather bag. "Because one day, the post office gave her a letter she refused to deliver." Emma opened the bag. Inside was one black envelope. Her grandmother's name was written across it. Beneath it was another name, Emma Hayes. Her hands shook. The letter was for both of them. Henry warned her not to open it until she was outside, but Emma could not wait. She tore the envelope open. Inside was a letter from her mother. Emma's mother had died when Emma was 6. At least, that was what she had always been told. But the letter said something else. Her mother had not died in an accident. She had left Willow Creek to escape the burden of the letters. She had believed the post office would one day take Emma too. So she disappeared, hoping the route would end with her. The final line read, "If my daughter ever receives this, tell her I am sorry I mistook leaving for saving." Emma lowered the letter. Her entire life shifted quietly, not with anger, but with a sadness too deep for words. The room began to shake. Letters slid from shelves. Henry stepped forward. The black letter was the last one. "What happens now?" Emma asked. "If you deliver it, the post office keeps sending letters forever. And if I don't? Every undelivered word is released. Will people forget?" Henry smiled. "No. They will finally remember what matters without needing a letter to tell them." Emma looked at the endless shelves, all those unsaid words. all that waiting, then she thought of Arthur Bell, of Rose Callahan, of her grandmother, of her mother who had run from a duty she could not carry. Emma folded the black letter and placed it back inside the mailbag. "I'm not delivering this." Henry closed his eyes, then finished the route. Emma carried the leather mailbag into the main room. The old counter lights flickered on. Mail slots opened one by one. A warm wind moved through the building. Thousands of letters rose into the air, spinning slowly around her. Whispers filled the post office. Not frightening whispers, grateful ones. "Thank you. I'm sorry. I remember. I forgive you." The locked front door opened by itself. Emma stepped outside as the sun disappeared behind the hills. Behind her, the old post office glowed softly from within. Then, every window went dark. The bell rang once, and the building became silent. The next morning, no letter appeared, nor the morning after that. For the first time in 42 years, the old post office received nothing. The town felt different, lighter. People could not explain it, but they began calling relatives they had avoided for years. Neighbors spoke across fences. Old friends met for coffee. Arthur Bell stopped waiting by his window and planted lilies in his garden. Emma kept her mother's letter in a wooden box beside her bed. She never found her mother, but she stopped feeling abandoned. Some people leave because they do not love you. Others leave because they are afraid love will not be enough. Understanding the difference did not erase the pain, but it softened it. Years later, Willow Creek restored the old post office, not as a working building, as a small museum. The sorting shelves remained, the counter was polished, the cracked windows were replaced, and above the entrance, a new wooden sign was added. The House of Undelivered Words. Visitors came from across the country. They wrote letters to people they missed, letters they never planned to send. Apologies, confessions, goodbyes. Then they placed them in a brass box near the old counter. No one knew why it helped. It simply did. Emma became the museum's caretaker. Every evening, before locking the door, she checked the old mail slot. It was always empty, except once. Many years later, on a snowy morning in December, Emma found a small white envelope on the floor. No stamp, no address, only her name. Inside were 5 words. "You finished what I couldn't." There was no signature, but Emma knew the handwriting, her grandmother's. She smiled through tears and placed the letter in the museum's first display case. And from that day on, people said the old post office was no longer haunted by letters. It was protected by them, because some messages arrived too late to change the past, but just in time to heal what the past left behind. The end. The House That Appeared Every Winter. An original mystery story. Every winter, when the first heavy snow covered the hills of Vermont, a house appeared at the edge of black pine forest. Not slowly, not through construction. One morning, the field would be empty. The next morning, the house would be there. A tall, white farmhouse with blue shutters, a stone chimney, and warm yellow light glowing behind every window. No road led to it, no footprints surrounded it, and by the first morning of spring, it always disappeared. The people of Maple Hollow knew about the house. Their grandparents had seen it. Their great-grandparents had whispered about it. But no one in town admitted they believed the stories. They simply avoided that part of the forest during winter. They said the snow was too deep, the wind was too sharp, the trees were too easy to get lost between. but everyone knew the real reason. They were afraid the house might invite them in. Clara Whitmore first saw the house when she was 10 years old. She was riding in the back seat of her father's truck during a snowstorm. For one brief moment, through the white blur outside the window, she saw a glowing porch light in the middle of the field. A woman stood on the porch, waving. Clara turned to her father. "Who lives there?" Her father's face went pale. He did not answer. He only drove faster. That night, he locked every door in their house and told Clara one thing. "If you ever see that house again, you do not go near it." 20 years passed. Clara left Maple Hollow, became a restoration architect, and built a life far away from the cold forest of her childhood. She repaired old homes, studied forgotten buildings, learned how wood, stone, and time could hold memories. Then her father died, and Clara returned to Maple Hollow in the middle of December. The town looked smaller than she remembered. The same diner, the same church, the same frozen lake, and beyond the far hills, black pine forest waited beneath the snow. On the morning after the funeral, Clara found a sealed envelope inside her father's desk. Her name was written on the front. Inside was a single old photograph. It showed the white farmhouse, the house from the field. On the back, her father had written, "It appeared the winter your mother vanished." Clara sat motionless for a long time. Her mother had disappeared when Clara was 4. All her life she had been told it happened during a winter storm. No note, no goodbye, no trace. Now Clara wondered if the story had always been missing its most important piece. That evening, she drove to the edge of black pine forest. Snow drifted across the road. The sky was turning dark. At first, the field was empty. Then the wind shifted. The falling snow parted like a curtain, and there it stood. The house, exactly as she remembered. White walls, blue shutters, stone chimney, warm windows, a porch light glowing gold against the winter dark. Clara stepped out of the car. No sound came from the forest. No birds, no wind. Only the soft crunch of snow beneath her boots. Then the front door opened. A voice from inside called gently, "Clara?" It was her mother's voice. Clara almost ran. Instead, she walked forward. The porch boards did not creak beneath her feet. The door opened wider. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon, pine wood, and old books. A fire burned in the living room. A clock ticked softly on the wall. Everything felt warm, too familiar. On the mantel stood a framed photograph of Clara as a child. Beside it was another photograph, Clara's mother, Evelyn Whitmore, smiling, young, exactly as Clara remembered from old family pictures. Then footsteps sounded from the kitchen. A woman appeared, not a ghost, not a memory, her mother. She looked no older than the day she vanished. Clara could not speak. Evelyn stepped forward slowly. "My little girl." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "That's impossible." Evelyn smiled sadly. "I know." For a moment, Clara wanted to believe everything, that her mother had been trapped, that she had waited, that the years could somehow be undone. But then Clara noticed the kitchen calendar. December 17th. The year was wrong. It showed the year her mother disappeared. The house was not simply appearing every winter. It was carrying one winter with it. The same winter. Again and again.
Evelyn explained as gently as she could. On the night she vanished, she had followed a light into the field during the storm.
She found the house standing alone. Inside was warm, safe, quiet. A man in a gray coat told her she could rest until the storm passed. But when she tried to leave the next morning, the door opened to the same night, the same snow, the same hour. The house was not a home. It was a loop, a place where winter never moved forward. "And you never escaped?" Clara whispered. Evelyn looked toward the window. Not completely. The man in the gray coat still lived upstairs, or perhaps he had never lived at all. He was called Mr. Vale. He had greeted every person who entered the house for more than a century. Lost travelers, runaway children, people grieving, people searching, people who followed lights in the snow. Some stayed for minutes, some for years. But the house always asked the same thing. Would you like to forget what hurts? That was its trap. The more a person accepted comfort, the more the outside world forgot them. Clara felt a chill despite the fire. "Did you forget me?" Evelyn's face broke with pain. "Never. That's why I'm still here." She had spent 20 years resisting the house, remembering Clara every day, repeating her name, drawing her face, writing letters she could never send. Because as long as Evelyn remembered her daughter, the house could not fully keep her. But it could not release her either. Suddenly, the staircase creaked. A man in a gray coat stood at the top, tall, polite, smiling without warmth. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "you found your way back." Clara stepped beside her mother. "What is this place?" Mr. Vale descended slowly. "A shelter." "For whom?" "For those who cannot bear the cold outside." His eyes moved toward Evelyn. "Your mother was offered peace." "My mother was trapped." Mr. Vale's smile did not change. Only because she refused to let go. The house shifted around them. The walls stretched. The windows darkened. From somewhere deep inside came whispers, hundreds of voices, people who had entered over the decades, people who had chosen to forget. Clara saw them in flashes. A soldier from 1918, a widow from 1943, a child from 1962, a traveler from 1989, all sitting in warm rooms, smiling gently, remembering nothing. The house had not harmed them. It had erased their pain, but it had erased their lives with it. Mr. Vale offered Clara a room where her father was still alive, where her mother had never disappeared, where every winter night ended with dinner, laughter, and sleep. "All you have to do," he said, "is stop asking questions." For 1 second, Clara wanted it. She wanted to be 10 years old again, wanted her father's truck in the driveway, wanted her mother in the kitchen, wanted a life without the empty space that had shaped everything. But then she looked at Evelyn. Her mother had survived 20 years of winter, not by forgetting pain, but by remembering love. Clara understood. The house did not feed on fear. It fed on surrender. She ran to the fireplace and grabbed one of the letters stacked beside it. Hundreds of pages, written by Evelyn over the years. Clara's name appeared on every one. She threw the letters into the air. They did not fall. They spun around the room like bright white birds. Each page glowed with memory. Evelyn began reading aloud. Clara's first steps, her favorite blue coat, the song she sang at bedtime, the scar on her left knee, the way she said "snow" as a child. Every memory Evelyn had protected became a light inside the house. The walls cracked. The windows shook. Mr. Vale's smile disappeared. Stop. But Evelyn kept reading, and Clara joined her. The front door burst open. Outside was not the endless winter field. It was morning. Real morning. The first true morning the house had seen in decades. The people inside began waking, one by one. The soldier remembered his brother. The widow remembered her garden. The child remembered his name. The traveler remembered the road home. The house trembled beneath them, not angry, afraid, because a place built from forgetting cannot survive memory. Clara grabbed her mother's hand and ran toward the door. Behind them, Mr. Vale called out, "You cannot take her back." Evelyn stumbled. For a moment, her hand became cold, transparent. The years she had lost pulled at her. Clara held tighter. "You remembered me," Clara whispered. "Now let me remember you." They stepped through the door together. Clara woke in the snowy field at sunrise. The house was gone. Only a square of untouched grass remained where it had stood. Beside her lay her mother, older now, her hair streaked with silver, her face lined with the 20 years the house had stolen and returned all at once. But she was breathing, alive. When Evelyn opened her eyes, she saw Clara and smiled. "Did winter end?" Clara held her hand. "Yes." Maple Hollow never saw the house again. The field remained empty every winter after that. Some townspeople were disappointed. Legends are easier to love when they remain distant. But others noticed changes. Old missing persons reports were reopened. Families received answers. A few people returned with no memory of where they had been, only the feeling that they had slept too long. Clara and Evelyn stayed in Maple Hollow for 1 year. They did not try to recover all the lost time. They simply lived slowly. Morning coffee, short walks, old photographs, long conversations beside the fire. Some wounds do not vanish when the truth is found, but they can, finally, begin to heal. Years later, Clara restored her father's house and turned it into a small winter inn. Above the fireplace, she framed one of Evelyn's letters. The first line read, "My Clara, if the world forgets me, I will remember you enough for both of us." Guests often asked about it. Clara would smile and say it was a family story, nothing more. But every winter, when snow covered the hills and the forest grew quiet, Clara still looked toward the empty field, not with fear, with gratitude. Because she knew some houses are built from wood and stone, some from memory, and some from the quiet wish to escape pain. But the safest home is not the one that lets you forget. It is the one where you are remembered, even through the longest winter. The end. The Last Cabin at Whisper Lake, an original mystery story. Whisper Lake was so quiet that people said it could hear your thoughts. It lay deep in the mountains of northern Maine, hidden between pine forests, black cliffs, and long stretches of road where cell service disappeared for miles. On summer mornings, the lake looked peaceful. Silver water, soft mist, loons calling across the surface. But the locals knew one rule: never stay at the last cabin. There were 12 cabins along Whisper Lake. 11 were rented every summer by families, fishermen, hikers, and tourists who wanted silence. The 12th cabin stood alone at the farthest edge of the lake, where the trees grew thick and the water turned dark. It had no number on the door, No name on the rental list. No path on the visitor map. And yet, sometimes, a reservation would appear for it. Always under the same name. Guest unknown. Mara Ellis first came to Whisper Lake after her father died. She was 30 years old, a school counselor from Boston, and she had spent the last year taking care of everyone except herself. When her father's lawyer handed her an old envelope, she expected papers. Instead, she found a key. A brass cabin key with a faded wooden tag. On one side was written, Whisper Lake. On the other side, Return before the water speaks. Mara had no idea what it meant. Her father had never mentioned owning a cabin. But inside the envelope was one final note in his handwriting. If you ever need to understand why I left every autumn, go to the last cabin. Mara drove north 3 days later. The road narrowed as she entered the mountains. Pine trees pressed close on both sides. By sunset, she reached Whisper Lake Lodge, a small wooden office near the shoreline. The manager, an elderly woman named Ruth, looked at the brass key and stopped smiling. "Where did you get that?" "My father left it to me." "What was his name?" "Daniel Ellis." Ruth closed the guest book slowly. "I knew Daniel." Mara leaned forward. "You did?" "He came every October." "Why?" Ruth looked toward the lake. "To listen." Ruth refused to explain further. She only gave Mara a lantern and pointed down an old trail behind the lodge. "Don't stay past midnight if you hear your name." Mara almost laughed. But Ruth did not look like someone making a joke. The trail followed the lake for nearly a mile. 11 cabins appeared along the water, each warm and ordinary. Families cooked dinner. Children carried fishing rods. Someone played quiet music on a porch. Then the trail changed. The laughter faded. The trees grew closer. And at the very end of the lake, Mara found the last cabin. It was smaller than the others. Dark wood, stone chimney, a porch facing the water. No lights inside, no smoke from the chimney. Yet the windows were clean, and the steps had no dust, as if someone had been maintaining it. Mara unlocked the door. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar, rain, and old paper. There was a bed, a table, a fireplace, and one shelf filled with journals. Every journal had a year written on the spine. 1979, 1980, 1981, 1982, 1983, 1984. Her father's handwriting filled many of them. Mara opened the newest one. The first page read, "The lake remembers what people cannot say." That night, Mara sat by the fireplace reading. Her father had written about visitors who came to the lake with heavy hearts. A widower who heard his wife's voice across the water. A mother who dreamed of the child she never apologized to. A man who confessed a secret to the lake and never returned the same. At first, Mara thought the journals were grief, not truth. Then the lake whispered, softly, almost kindly, "Mara." She froze. The fire cracked. The cabin went silent. Outside, the lake lay black beneath the moon. Then the voice came again. "Mara." It sounded like her father.
She stepped onto the porch. Mist drifted across the water. At the center of the lake, a lantern glowed, one small yellow light floating where no boat should be. Mara gripped the railing. "Dad?" The lantern moved closer. The water did not ripple around it. A voice whispered from the fog. "You came late." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "This isn't real." The voice answered, "Does it need to be?" Mara ran inside and slammed the door. Her heart pounded. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she returned to the lodge and demanded answers. Ruth listened quietly. Then she poured coffee and told the story. Whisper Lake had once been a logging settlement. In 1931, a storm trapped 12 workers in the forest. 11 made it back. 1 did not. His cabin stood at the far edge of the lake. Searchers found his boots beside the water and his journal on the table. The final line read, "The lake knows my name now." After that, strange things began happening. People who stayed in the cabin heard voices. Not ghosts exactly. Memories. Regrets. Words they had buried too deeply to speak aloud. Some left healed. Some left broken. And some tried to follow the voices into the water. That was why Ruth warned everyone. The lake did not lie. But it did not protect you from the truth either. Mara wanted to leave. But one question kept her there. Why had her father come every October? She returned to the cabin in daylight and read more journals. The answer appeared in an entry from 1994, the year Mara's mother died. Her father had written, "I told Mara her mother passed peacefully." That was not the whole truth. Mara stopped breathing. Her mother's death had always been simple in family memory. A winter illness, a hospital room, a goodbye. Mara had been too young to understand, but the journal continued. She asked me to tell Mara about the letters. I never did. I thought silence would be kinder. Silence is never kind forever. Mara turned the page. The next entry was blank. That evening, the lake whispered again. This time, it was not her father's voice. It was her mother's. "Mara, come outside." The voice was gentle, warm, exactly as Mara remembered from childhood dreams. Mara stepped onto the porch. The floating lantern waited closer than before. The mist opened, revealing a narrow wooden dock that had not been there earlier. At the end of the dock stood a woman in a pale coat. Mara's mother. Young, smiling, impossible. Mara took one step forward, then another. The lake was completely still. Her mother held out a hand. "I have waited so long." Mara whispered, "For what?" "To tell you what he could not." From inside the cabin, something fell. A journal. The sound broke the spell. Mara turned away from the dock and ran back inside. On the floor lay a journal she had not seen before. Its cover was white. No year. No title. Inside was a letter addressed to her, in her mother's handwriting. "My dearest Mara, if you are reading this, then your father finally found the courage to bring you here. Or perhaps he failed, and the lake found another way. There are things grief makes us hide, but love should never become a locked room." The letter explained that Mara's mother had known she was dying. Before she passed, she wrote 12 letters for Mara, one for each birthday until she turned 18. Her father had kept them hidden, not out of cruelty, but because he could not bear watching Mara grieve every year. He thought he was protecting her. Instead, he had taken away the only voice her mother had left behind.
Mara cried until the fire burned low. For years, she had believed her father's silence meant strength. Now she understood it had been fear, and fear, if kept too long, can look like betrayal. At midnight, the lake whispered again.
This time, many voices joined. Her father, her mother, children, old men, women crying softly. Every sorrow the lake had ever heard. The cabin walls trembled. The journals opened by themselves. Pages turned faster and faster. Then the water spoke clearly. Give us what was never said. Mara understood the cabin's purpose. It was not haunted. It was listening, waiting for people to surrender the words they had carried too long. Mara found her father's final journal beneath the bed. Inside was a sealed envelope. Her name. Her hands shook as she opened it. My Mara, I came to Whisper Lake every year to speak to your mother, but all I ever heard was myself. I told the lake I was sorry. I told it I was afraid, but I never told you. The letters are hidden where your mother used to sing to you. At home, under the piano bench. Please forgive me if you can. And if the lake calls your name, do not answer by walking toward it. Answer by telling the truth. Mara lowered the letter. Outside, the dock reappeared. Her mother stood at the end. Her father stood beside her, both smiling, both waiting. The water was dark and calm. Mara walked to the porch but did not step onto the dock. Instead, she spoke. I'm angry. The lake went silent. I'm angry you left. She looked at her mother. I'm angry you hid the letters. She looked at where her father stood. I'm angry I had to grow up with all that silence. The lantern dimmed. Her voice shook. But I loved you. I still do. And I don't want to follow you. I want to live with what you left me. The mist began to lift. Her parents' figures faded, not sadly, but peacefully. The dock disappeared. The lake returned to ordinary darkness. For the first time all night, Mara heard wind in the trees. Real wind. Living wind. At sunrise, Ruth found her sitting on the porch. You heard it, Ruth said. Mara nodded. And? I answered. Ruth smiled. Then the lake has nothing more to take from you. Before leaving, Mara placed her father's journals back on the shelf, but she kept the white one, the one with her mother's letter. When she locked the cabin, the brass key felt warmer than before. The wooden tag had changed. The old warning was gone. Now it read, "Return only when you are ready to listen." Back in Boston, Mara found the letters beneath the piano bench, exactly where her father said they would be. 12 envelopes, 12 birthdays, 12 pieces of a mother's voice returned too late, yet still somehow on time. She read one every Sunday morning. Some made her laugh. Some made her cry. Some simply told her ordinary things. How to make soup. How to watch snowfall. How to trust kindness. How to keep living. Years later, Mara returned to Whisper Lake. Not because she was broken, but because she had become whole enough to visit. The last cabin still stood at the edge of the dark water. The porch faced the lake. The journals waited on the shelf. And that night, as the moon rose above the pines, she heard the lake whisper. Not her name, not a warning, only a soft sound, like someone turning a page. Mara smiled. Some places do not exist to frighten us. Some places exist to hold what we are not yet ready to carry. And at Whisper Lake, beyond the last cabin, beneath the quiet water, every unsaid word waits patiently until the heart is ready to speak. The end. The church that rang its bells without anyone inside. An original mystery story. In the small town of Briar Falls, there stood an old white church on a hill. It had been built in 1889, long before paved roads reached the valley. Its wooden walls had survived storms, wars, fires, and years of silence. The windows were tall
tall and narrow. The roof was steep and dark. And at the top of the bell tower hung one enormous bronze bell. For decades, that bell had called people to weddings, funerals, Sunday prayers, and Christmas mornings. But after the church closed in 1976, the bell still rang. Not every day, not every week, only when someone in town was about to disappear. The first time it happened, people blamed the wind. A storm had rolled over Briar Falls at midnight. Rain struck the rooftops. Trees bent in the dark. Then the old church bell rang 3 times. Deep, slow, heavy. By morning, a farmer named Henry Cobb was gone. His truck remained in the driveway. His coat hung by the door. His dog waited on the porch. But Henry had vanished. Search teams looked for days. They found nothing. No footprints, no note, no sign of an accident. Only one strange thing: mud on the church steps, as if someone had walked up to the locked door during the storm. Over the next 40 years, the bell rang 7 more times. Each time, someone disappeared within 24 hours. A school teacher, a mechanic, a teenage boy, an old woman who lived alone near the river. The pattern was impossible to ignore. The church had no electricity. The bell rope had been removed. The tower stairs were rotten and locked behind iron bars. No person could have climbed up there safely. Still, the bell rang. And Briar Falls learned to fear its sound. Lena Hart first heard the bell when she was 8 years old. It rang at 2:11 in the morning. 3 slow notes. Her mother stood at the window, pale and silent. The next day, Lena's father disappeared while driving to the next town. His car was found beside the road. The engine was cold. The keys were still inside. But her father was gone. After that night, Lena's mother never spoke of the church again. She packed their belongings and moved them away before winter. Lena grew up far from Briar Falls, but she never forgot the sound of the bell. 23 years later, Lena returned. She was now a journalist, known for investigating forgotten local mysteries. Her mother had passed away, leaving behind a small wooden box. Inside was an old photograph of the church, a silver cross, and a folded letter written in her father's handwriting. The letter contained only one sentence: "If the bell rings again, do not ask who is missing. Ask who is calling." Lena read the words again and again. Her father had known something he never told them. So she went back to Briar Falls. The town looked smaller than she remembered. The diner still stood beside the gas station. The river still curved behind the mill. And the old church still waited on the hill. Its paint had peeled. Its windows were dusty. Its front doors were chained shut. But the bell tower rose above everything. Dark, silent, watching. The townspeople were not happy to see Lena. Some remembered her. Most remembered her father. When she asked about the bell, conversations ended quickly. Only one person agreed to speak: an elderly caretaker named Miriam Vale. She lived in a cottage behind the cemetery and had kept the church grounds from disappearing into weeds. Miriam gave Lena one warning: do not stay on the hill after sunset. Lena asked why. Miriam looked toward the tower. Because the bell does not ring for the dead. Then who does it ring for? Miriam's voice lowered. For the ones who are still waiting. That evening, Lena entered the church. The lock on the side door broke easily. Inside, the air smelled of dust, pine wood, and old hymnals. Rows of empty pews faced a simple altar. Sunlight slipped through stained glass, painting the floor in faded colors. Everything was still, too still. Lena walked toward the bell tower door. It was sealed with a rusted iron chain. Above it, someone had carved words into the wood. The bell answers what the town hides. Lena touched the letters. They were old, older than the disappearances.
In a small office behind the altar, she found church records, baptisms, marriages, funerals. But one book was different. Its cover had no title. Inside were names: Henry Cobb, the school teacher, the mechanic, the teenage boy, the old woman, all the people who had disappeared. And at the very bottom, her father's name, Thomas Hart. Beside each name was a date, the date after the bell rang. Lena turned the page. There was one more name, written recently: Lena Hart. Her breath stopped. The date was tomorrow. A deep sound rolled through the church. The bell. One note, then another, then a third. Lena dropped the book. Outside, the town lights flickered. The bell tower shook, though no one was inside it. The sound passed through her chest like thunder. Then silence returned. Lena ran from the church and down the hill. By the time she reached town, everyone was standing outside their homes. They had heard it too. The bell had rung. And this time, it had rung for her. Miriam found Lena at the diner before midnight. "You saw the book," she said. Lena nodded. "My name is in it." Miriam closed her eyes. "I was afraid of that. What is happening here?" For a long moment, Miriam said nothing. Then she told the story Briar Falls had tried to bury. In 1947, the church had been used as a shelter during a terrible winter flood. Dozens of townspeople gathered inside while the river rose. Among them was a young bell ringer named Samuel Vale, Miriam's older brother. He was 17, brave, kind, and responsible for ringing the bell whenever help was needed. During the flood, a group of strangers arrived at the church doors, travelers trapped by the storm. But some townspeople feared there was not enough food or room. The doors were locked. Samuel begged the elders to let them in. They refused. So Samuel climbed the bell tower and rang the bell to call for help from neighboring farms. The elders panicked. They believed the sound would draw more desperate people to the church. So they went upstairs to stop him. What happened next was never written down. By morning, Samuel was gone. So were the travelers outside. The official story said the flood took them. But Miriam had always known the truth. The town had silenced the bell, and the bell had never forgiven them. Lena listened in horror. "What does this have to do with my father?" Miriam's eyes filled with sadness. "Your father found Samuel's journal. He wanted to tell the truth, but the town wouldn't let him." Lena whispered. "So the bell took him?" "No," Miriam said. "The bell called him." Lena returned to the church before dawn. If the bell had called her father, maybe he had left something behind. This time, the bell tower door stood open. The chain lay broken on the floor. Lena climbed the narrow stairs. Each step groaned beneath her weight. At the top, the bell hung in darkness. Huge, cold, ancient. There was no rope, no mechanism, yet the bronze surface vibrated softly, as if remembering sound. Behind the bell,
hidden between wooden beams, Lena found a small metal box. Inside was her father's notebook. The final entry read, "They are not gone. They are beneath the church." Beneath the church, there was an old cellar no one had mentioned. Lena found the entrance under a loose floorboard near the altar. She descended with a flashlight. The air below was cold and damp. The cellar walls were made of stone. At the far end stood a sealed wooden door. On it was carved the same symbol that appeared throughout the church records, a bell inside a circle. Lena pushed the door open. Behind it was not a room, it was a tunnel. The tunnel led beneath the hill and opened into a hidden chamber. Inside were old lanterns, blankets, food tins, and names carved into the walls. Samuel Vale, the Travelers, Henry Cobb, Thomas Hart, every missing person. Lena touched her father's name. Then a voice spoke behind her. "Lena." She turned slowly. A man stood at the edge of the lantern light, older than she remembered, tired, but alive. Her father. Lena ran to him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Thomas explained that the bell had not killed anyone. It had called people who could hear the truth. Each person who disappeared had discovered part of the town's buried history. Some chose to remain beneath the hill, guarding the evidence until someone brave enough could bring it into the light. Others had left and begun new lives far away, unable to return. Thomas had stayed. He had waited for Lena, because the truth needed a final witness.
Together, they found Samuel Vale's journal in the chamber. It described the night of the flood, the locked doors, the pleas from outside, the fight in the tower. Samuel had survived the fall, but refused to stay in a town that would rather hide cruelty than confess it. He led the stranded travelers through the old cellar tunnel to safety. But to protect them from retaliation, he allowed the town to believe he had vanished. Over time, guilt changed the story into a curse. The bell did not punish Briar Falls. It reminded Briar Falls, again and again, until someone listened. At sunrise, Lena and Thomas carried the journals, records, and carved names back into the church. The townspeople gathered in silence. Miriam stood at the front, tears on her face. For the first time in 77 years, the truth was spoken aloud. Not as legend, not as rumor, as history. The bell tower creaked above them. Then the bronze bell rang once, only once. Soft, clear, peaceful. No one disappeared. No storm came. The sound drifted over the valley like a long-held breath finally released. In the months that followed, Briar Falls restored the church, not as a place of worship alone, but as a memorial. The names of the travelers were carved into a stone wall. Samuel Vale's story was placed beside the entrance, and the hidden cellar was open to visitors. Lena wrote the full account in a book called The Bell Beneath the Hill. Some readers called it a mystery, others called it a ghost story. But Lena knew it was something simpler, a story about guilt, memory, and the sound truth makes when it can no longer stay buried. Years later, the church bell still hangs above Briar Falls. It no longer rings before disappearances. It rings every year on the anniversary of the flood. 3 slow notes, one for the people outside the door, one for the boy who tried to save them, and one for the town that finally learned to remember. And if you stand on the hill at dusk, when the valley grows quiet and the river turns silver below,
You may hear the old bell hum softly in the tower. Not because anyone is inside, not because the wind moves it, but because some truths, once awakened, never become silent again. The end.